would require that all candidates have an ongoing consultative process with their chapter. One of the required documents would be a report from the chapter outlining the chapter's understanding of the candidate's work and a reporting of their findings on the candidate as well. So the standards, the certification manual, as well as the forms that you'll find online are all good tools to help understand well in advance of the certification review panel meeting to know what you're dealing with. It's not an easy process in terms of the amount of time to go through all of that. And so familiarizing yourself and knowing what the time constraints that you may have as a candidate and with the chapter is an important part of the process. Let's look at some of the questions that have been submitted. Krista, I'm assuming also as we go through these that we can field some questions as a part of this meeting as well. Is that correct? Okay. First question that I have here reads, as I've been trying to shepherd a chapter member through the certification process as her convener, the process is seeming confusing and cumbersome. Could we have a checklist of steps to provide a qualified candidate with a reasonable timeline? Say starting from when a candidate who has the prerequisite CP units decides to start the certification process. In answering that, part of our intent in revising some of the forms that you will see online is that would act as a checklist of sorts to give people a clear understanding of what it is that they need to provide in terms of the documentation that is to be reviewed at the chapter level. We do have a deadline of 60 days before a candidate can meet with a certification review panel. So in other words, all the documents would need to be submitted to the certification committee 60 days before the intended review date. But in terms of the checklist of steps prior to that, it is our hope that a candidate will have thoroughly had their documents discussed and reviewed at the chapter level prior to that 60 days. So one could say like 90 days before they intend to report to a review panel that they have had ongoing discussions with their chapter regarding their documentation. And then the idea would be that if the chapter at the chapter level is prepared to vouch for the candidate and write a favorable report, then that would be submitted along with the other certification documents.
Jonathan, if I might add, this is Perry Miller. All of this information is posted on CPSP.org's website under the tab of certification. So there's both the manual, the documents, the outline, the requirements, the standards for each certification category.
And to get further details, you can look at the form itself. So if one is applying for board certified clinical chaplain, you can open up the form and you can see some of the detailed items that are required for that particular certification. All right, let's move on. The second question, how does someone whose seminary training has not led to an MDiv, though it has qualified them for ordination in their denomination, receive MDiv equivalency? This is a fairly, that's a really good question. We're a fairly new process for this with CPSP. In the past, we'd found that candidates would come and present for equivalency to the certification committee and find that that was far too late in the process to learn that they may not have met an equivalency. So Al Henager is heading up a new task group within CPSP to field that very question. We would want the MDiv equivalency question dealt with through that organization, and the Certification Committee has been funneling questions regarding equivalency to Al. And it is our hope that that will help candidates get that cleared up before they present for certification.
Yeah, again, another comment, Jonathan, to add to what you're saying. Actually, before someone enters, say, SIT training, for example, their equivalency is to be established prior to undergoing in a program designed to lead someone to be certified as a diplomate in CPE supervision or psychotherapy. So you don't get into that kind of training without having the equivalency issue settled.
Okay, third question. How does a candidate get a time slot with a review panel prior to the CPSP conference of his or her choice? I'm going to let Krista field that question because that information is actually on the website. I believe, Krista, you send out, there's a way to register for the review panel on the website, correct?
That's correct, Jonathan. People can register using the events page on the website, and I prefer that they do that just so I can check against what I'm receiving in for paperwork from them. Sorry, my phone's going crazy right now with text. It seems that the Zoom room that I've got, the subscription I've got, has a limit of 50 people. So I'm receiving some texts here from people. I'm letting them know that we're recording. So my apologies for all the background noise and the pinging going on you're hearing. Back to your question though, Jonathan, people, after they sign up and we hit the deadline, we figure out what we need for review panel members. We figure out a schedule. If participants need a special time, like they prefer afternoon because they're traveling or something like that, we do our best to accommodate them. So that's something to keep in mind when people are asking to schedule for review panels.
You will also, we will soon be letting the community know there will be 3 opportunities within 2017 where we will guaranteed have a review panel present. We've run into some difficulty previously to where we only had, 1 or 2 people sign up for a review panel. And we are committed to having at least 3 of those. And the events this coming year will be at the plenary 2017. There will be a review panel there. Also at the NCTS event in the Atlanta area, which will be sometime in the fall. And then in the Heartland NCTS sometime in July. And we are getting all of the specific dates for those and we'll publish those so people have plenty of time to know which review panel they might want to sit for. All right, moving on to the next question. What are the steps to follow in setting up a Dropbox file successfully? You will note that on our certification area, there are some instructions on Dropbox. We understand that everybody may not have a working knowledge of Dropbox, but hopefully somebody in the chapter does. And we advise folks to familiarize themselves through the tutorials and know how to do that. Krista, of course, is the administrative support person to assist with that. If you're having difficulty getting files uploaded, she will create the Dropbox file and to which the documents will go. But it is our understanding that on the candidate end or at the chapter level, there's a working knowledge of how to upload those documents. But Krista will create that folder for the candidate if everything is in order. If the membership fees and the dues and all have been paid, then we'll open a file and the candidate can upload the documents.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Jonathan? Finally, someone unmuted me. I was trying to speak to the last issue. May I go back to it for a moment?
Sure.
Is there a pattern in the applications of those that do not have MDivs to begin with? Is there a pattern? And are we observing and investigating? I don't like that word. Are we gathering the information about exactly what kind of degrees they have? I mean, are these MARs? What are these degrees that they've gotten that are satisfactory to their denomination, that are graduate level but are not MDiv?
Well, the hope would be that that the new committee that is formed would ascertain that kind of information. Largely, there's a good bit of effort going in to understand if a particular candidate would be qualified for ordination. Does that necessarily qualify them for our standards or not? That's a question that, in terms of the patterns and what we're seeing, I will say that in my experience in working with it, oftentimes it is a theological degree that is not an MDiv is usually what we're fielding in terms of equivalency questions. But part of the hope in creating this new committee would do the information gathering that you're speaking to. All right, let's move on. We got some questions regarding the palliative and hospice sub-certification. And the first question regarding that is, can a CPE unit previously used for board-certified clinical chaplain certification also be used for palliative and hospice sub-certification to meet the requirement in 1020.1.1? To be honest with you, I don't have the 1020.1.1. I don't have the standards in front of me, so I can't answer that specifically. But my thinking is that previous units for board-certified clinical chaplain that may qualify for that. There are some specific questions regarding palliative and hospice, and again, we would urge you to look over those standards. And there are a certain amount of time within the hospice and palliative that would be required. So the answer to that question is it may. I can't answer specifically whether it would or not. I don't know in that particular incident if the CPE unit would qualify for the hospice and palliative as well. The second question for the palliative and hospice subcert, are there any timing requirements on the clinical time related to the CPE unit? Must it be completed within the time boundaries of the unit, or can prior experience working in the palliative hospice field count towards the hours and IDG meeting requirements? I'm not aware of any timing requirements on that. Again, it's been some time since I looked specifically at the standards for this particular area, but I'm not aware of any. I think what we're looking for is the overall experience, and whether in the palliative and hospice field, if the work experience would qualify them to meet that. But I'm not aware of any time boundaries on that. The third question, can a candidate apply for certification for board-certified clinical chaplaincy and palliative hospice simultaneously? Bear in mind that the board-certified clinical chaplain would require meeting a review panel. That is an in-person review. The documentation can certainly all be sent in simultaneously, but it is a different process for the hospice and palliative. The certification committee itself would look at those documentations and make a determination whether the candidate has made the standard. So the answer to that question is yes, but in order to be certified at the hospice and palliative level, it would require a review by a review panel and a successful completion of that before the hospice and palliative could be granted. So that won't occur simultaneously, but all the documents certainly could be sent in simultaneously. Related to that, if the candidate is using a unit of CPE for both, again, yes, if that's the case, then that would simply need to be noted in the documentation that the CPE unit was used for both certification levels. Now, likewise, if the candidate is using a separate unit of CPE for palliative and hospice, not one for the four used for BCC. And again, yeah, if they've met the requirements and that happens to be a separate unit, the answer is yes, you can submit all of that at one time. There are a couple of other specific questions here that I'm going to get back to the person who's written. There's a couple of questions related that I think are going to require us to dig down a little bit deeper, and I will get back to the person who submitted those questions offline. It's related to case studies for submission as part of the palliative and hospice subcert. I'm not exactly clear what the question is, so we'll deal with those at another time. All right, the next question is related to reciprocity. Can the certification by reciprocity process be explained in detail? I am certified by ACCA as a clinical correctional chaplain. And why I am required to redo the entire certification process for certified chaplain if I've already achieved what is considered a more rigorous credential. Such reciprocal certification is already granted by APC and VA. Our reciprocity process, it requires the completion and submission of a form by the chapter on behalf of the candidate. And that form also would require that if somebody has a certification in another cognate group, to provide documentation that that person is in good standing with that cognate group, along with the completion of the form, the reciprocity form. And then the certification committee will look at that. It may not require that person go through the entire certification process. However, it may, depending upon what the cognate group is, how thorough a report from the chapter has been submitted. If there are questions regarding some of the other documentation, then we may suggest that a candidate meet and go through the certification process. If it is from a cognate group that has similar standards to ours and they're in good standing and it looks as if the candidate is well regarded by the chapter, then we can certainly grant a certification via reciprocity that would not require the complete and entire certification process.
Jonathan, may I
Yes.
ask a question?
Sure.
Why does the person want credentials from us?
I don't have the answer to that question. I'm assuming that can be for any number of reasons. I'm just looking at questions that have been submitted to us.
Okay, my point relates to a recent conversation that I had with Trace regarding ACPE and his wish that they form structures that are analogous to our chapters. Is the person that you're talking about perhaps interested in CPSP because of the chapter relations that we make available and require of our members?
That certainly could be one answer. I'm assuming there could be, many, many others.
Don't we have a responsibility to ask the question?
Well, I mean, that certainly can be a part of the process once they come before the reciprocity. But I mean, that's not traditionally been a question. I mean, we have had candidates who would come through who want to become board certified clinically trained with us before continuing their diplomate training, for instance, and who very much do want to become a part of the chapter and have seeked reciprocity as a part of that. Or they may, they may have been out of the, just recently begun meeting with a chapter and want to become certified through us. It looks like in our chat section somebody is clarifying the question.
Jonathan, back to
Yes.
an earlier comment you made about the certification of clinicians. If I understood you correctly, you said an MDiv was required for all certifications. The associate clinical chaplain certification does not require an MDiv unless that's been changed out of my awareness.
No, you're absolutely right. An associate level would not
Right.
require the MDiv.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, question number 2, what qualifies for group dynamics training? I started as an SIT under the 2014 standards, which required attending an NCTS. Now a residential Tavistock training is required. Will attendance at an NCTS that is taught by Tavistock certified individuals count for that requirement? Also, some using organizations strongly oppose Tavistock. Is there any consideration regarding that? A couple of incidents where we do require the Tavistock or group dynamics, and that is, as you may know, for the diplomate supervisor, also at the clinician level, for those who have done most of all their CPE as a distance learning, or we also require some training in group dynamics. What qualifies for that, I think, is something that we need to certainly do some work as a community in regarding how we define that. Perhaps, Raymond, you can speak to with your understanding of those requirements and the various NCTSs.
Well, the last thing we want to do is become a legalistic, paint by numbers organization. I think the point here is to observe the spirit of the request, of the demand, of the requirement around Tavistock. There are a lot of ways to skin a cat, so let's try to avoid being bean counters. However you get in touch with the so-called Tavistock approach, which basically is very simple. It is an understanding of how the unconscious works in groups as it does in the individual. And if you can speak to that, and if you to that cogently or with intelligence, so that should be enough. We don't want to get into the business of counting beans or asking people exactly where they've been and what they've done. It doesn't take long to talk to someone to recognize that they either have a sense of the unconscious as it work in groups as it is in individuals. It doesn't take long to figure that out. So the best way probably to get in touch with this kind of business with so-called Tavistock is to go to one of their conferences, or the week long or weekend long or whatever. There are a lot of ways to skin the cat on this, and if you know it, you know it. And let's let people find their own way and learn in their own style. And if you're trying to cut corners and cheat and say, I went to this conference, 3 years ago and blah, 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 and then I'm if you're trying to operate on the basis of the fact that you went to some conference and therefore you qualify, that's also the wrong basis. It's what you know, what you can speak to, what you know about yourself, what you know about how the chapter functions, and the basic question is, are you aware of the unconscious as it works in all of us and in groups? That's all. Nothing more than that.
Third question from this person. There was recently distributed a required reading list for SITs. The question is, can it be explained why certain leading scholars in pastoral and spiritual care were left off the list? And also some understanding of how it was that the list focused on the psychoanalytic model instead of including multiple models available in the contemporary social science. I also noticed nowhere is communication theory discussed in reading lists or the standards. The same may also be said for sociology, anthropology, and cross-cultural studies. Bear in mind that the list that was recently distributed is certainly a work in progress. It's not intended to be an exhaustive list, rather a list of the kinds of theories and scholars that we would consider as the core. It's not intended to be exhaustive in any way, but certainly representative of the kinds of theorists at the diplomate level that we would certainly like to see. No means was it an exhaustive list. Bear in mind that for us at CPSP, that list of folks are certainly in the Boyson spirit, the spirit of one's awareness of themselves over and against education, and that was intended to be a list of a place certainly to start, but not an exhaustive list. Anybody else want to speak to that question from the certification committee?
Don't come not having at least read one of Boyson's books.
Yeah. The next question, what adjustments should SITs make that began their process under the 2014 standards? I'm just trying to think of what was different in the standards from 2014 to now. Certainly the Tavistock training that we've just spoken about, I think would be one of the changes since 2014. A lot of the adjustments on becoming an SIT certainly have changed in that the certification committee now has a review process before SIT begins their training. But from 2014 to 2016, in terms of the diplomate, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference there, and I can't remember exactly what some of those differences are. Now, bear in mind that as people are going through the process, in the spirit of what Raymond shared earlier, we try and work with folks who started their training under one set of standards and then that changed. Making notation of that and explaining that in the documentation that's presented to your chapter, and communicating that certainly is in the candidate's best interest. But I'm not right now off the top of my head aware of any significant changes from 2014 to 2016 for those going for their diplomate in supervision. There's a question here regarding case studies and final evaluations. This person says, I've completed an extended unit and 1-year residency that has certified me following the ACPE guidelines. I have not been certified by APC. I'm a new member and prefer the construct of CPSP. Under that model, don't assume that whatever qualifications you made for your CPE residency would necessarily be a complete package for our certification documents. Again, we would encourage people to look at their at the standards and present materials in keeping with what the standards require. I will say that generally, in terms of people's documentation, bear in mind that what we're looking at is integration as well. That there are elements in the autobiography and person's awareness of themselves and the particular theories that they've chosen, and that is also integrated within the case material that they're presenting. These documents should complement the other, and to where we have a clear understanding of the candidate's work, both in their person and in their training and the theories and how they integrate that in their work with people. That, I think we've gone through the list of submitted questions. So at this point, I don't know if we have a process for us fielding other questions tonight. Certainly we can try and get at that. I noticed that there's some activity in the chat section, and if we don't get all the questions answered tonight, we will get back to folks regarding answers to some of those questions as well. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Krista.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think what I'd like to do is, if people have questions, either raise your hand or whatever, or put it in the chat section here. And you know, I hesitate unmuting 50 people at once.
Sure.
I have a conference call going on at the same time, trying to accommodate the people who couldn't get in. I'm letting them join via freeconferencecall.com, just trying to get that taken care of.
Okay.
We'll certainly be doing another one of these soon, I hope. And you know, the response to this, it wasn't anticipated that we'd have this kind of response. So it's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, do you want me to unmute everyone? And
no, it looks like we have some questions coming in the chat section. Is that correct?
It appears to be that, yeah.
Yeah.
Peter Meadow. Peter, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, you know, the standards which I have here speak, you know, with the equivalency. I do not have an MDiv, and the equivalency issue is relevant to my application. And I just was a question of this statement of the equivalent degree from an accredited college, university, etc. You know, and what are we talking about? Accredited is not defined in the standards. And I know other members of longstanding who may have had degrees from non-traditional divinity schools, which are not accredited by choice, at times are not accredited by the United States Department of Education or whatever the accrediting body might be. This is separate from the faith tradition exception. So there are 3 or 4 fairly established interfaith Masters of Divinity programs right now. Some of them are a combination of online and in-person degrees, but they're a little non-traditional, and I don't believe any of them are accredited in the traditional sense, like an accredited Ivy League university. So that was my question.
You know, in answering that, I mean, unfortunately, there is not just a clear, concise way to answer that question. And again, we have set up a committee where folks can have those very questions dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Something Raymond said earlier, I think, is in the spirit of this, it's what people know ultimately with us as CPSP that matters most. And if education occurred from a non-accredited, then I think there's room and a case to be made in an equivalency appeal regarding that. The bottom line is what does the candidate know? But again, we have a separate committee now who's working to put candidates at ease, and we can get that question dealt with well before they begin an official formal certification review process. So Al Henager is the one who is heading up that committee, and we hope to get some web information up soon to where people can have those kinds of questions answered by Al's group. And I think Al is on the call if he wants to say a little bit about equivalency tonight.
Just I've spoken to Al and had some correspondence, so thank you.
Okay, sure.
I would point out to everyone, of course, that the preamble to the standards reaffirm what Raymond was talking about, that these are flexible standards which can be changed on a case-by-case basis. It's sort of part of the on the front page of the standards document.
Sure.
Yeah.
May I proffer, for maybe the last time I get to say it this way, we have a long-standing, centuries-old tradition of four theologies: exegetical, historical, systematic, and practical. And I can easily defend why every one of those is important for the formation of the mind and heart of a theologian. I don't care whether a person has an MDiv or not. I do care that their graduate theological education encompass those four theologies from whatever tradition they have come. I don't think that's hard to defend. So I've presented the comments. I hope they'll be taken seriously.
All right, I'm looking at the chat section. I don't see any new questions coming in. If anybody else has a question they want to field here through the chat section, I'd be happy to get at those. Al Henager would like to speak. Can we get Al Henager unmuted?
Okay, hi. Yes, speaking to the last question about equivalency, we do have some procedures in place already submitted to deal with two basic things. Those who come from more Western traditions, which would be the classical theological education that, I forgot who spoke just a while ago about, would include, but then also those from Eastern mentored traditions. And those have been pretty well hammered out. And if I'm ready to go with them, and the committee is, if we can kind of get some input on that and whether we need to modify them a bit or not, then we would be ready to go with them.
Isn't the ACPE white paper on Buddhism a wonderful model for us to use?
It is a good resource, but it is lacking. I have had a student who is a Buddhist priest and is up in the ranks of Buddhism, as well as a Hindu priest too. And I've had him on my committee. He's now going up for. He's a member of CPSP and is going up for associate this next round. And I've had him serving on the committee, and he was able to take that paper and some other things that we've looked at and to synthesize them into a really well-rounded document that gives us some guidelines to go by. Not only with Buddhism and Hinduism, but any other mentor traditions, if there be a Sikh or whatever. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Al. And I've got another question coming in. I'll be coming to the plenary to meet with a panel. And I know the process takes about an hour or more, but can someone briefly describe the norm for that time? What can one expect? I assume that the panel will have read my required papers and will pose questions based on that material. Is that correct? The answer to that is yes, you're absolutely correct. We would suggest that candidates be prepared with copies of the material. That's always helpful. If that needs to be referred to during the review itself. About 1 hour's time is about correct as well. The review panel would have a few minutes to meet before meeting with the candidate. They'll have some time with the candidate. They'd ask the candidate to leave the room so that they can discuss how the review went, and then invite the candidate back into the room, and at that point provide them the review panel's determination at that point. Question related to that: how many copies does a candidate need to bring? There are generally 3 people on a review panel, so having enough copies for the review panel, if that should be required during the panel, it's always good to have copies of that to refer to any material during the review itself. But the prior question, the review panel members will have already read the documentation. But having at least 3 copies and then 1 for the candidate as well. So 4 in total is sufficient.
Jonathan, we have a question from Vicki, so I'd like to unmute Vicki so she can ask it.
Any other questions that we can answer? And again, this is our first time through this process in a town hall. We'll hopefully get some of the kinks worked out. And we envision doing more of these. And again, we just urge people to familiarize themselves with the process and give themselves plenty of time to get everything submitted for that 60-day deadline before the review panel. Do we have another session like this set? We don't yet have one set. We envision that we will do 3 or 4 of these a year. We are open to suggestions from the community on how we can improve this process, and we'll be happy to do so. But as has been already said here via chat, we're really thankful to Krista for creating a lot of the behind the scenes that made this possible tonight. And certainly this seems like a successful venue, and we'll be doing more of it.
I just wanted to say that I've set up a conference call. I've got several people on it as well who are listening to this, aside from what we've got going on in Zoom. And this will be posted to the website by the end of this week is my goal, is to get it and out there so people can utilize it. So,
Okay.
Jonathan, there's a couple more questions in the conference, in the chat area. I see one way back from someone named Vicky. I don't have the last name next to her name, so my apologies, Vicky, but I've unmuted you, Vicky, if you wish to ask your question.
Okay, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I hope can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Terrific. I was wondering, I'll even unmask my camera. There we go. Okay, well that doesn't actually help too much. All right, there we go. I was wondering whether or not we needed approval for equivalency before we submit our documents to the chapter review panel.
That's our suggestion, that you get that dealt with. We prefer at the review panel level not to be fielding the question of equivalency. Now, in the chapter's understanding of equivalency, that may go a long way towards helping to provide justification for an equivalency. So, Vicki, our hope would be that the chapter has some working understanding of whether the candidate has met equivalency or not, based on their understanding of this.
Well, my chapter has an understanding, and it comes from the standards, which is 730.2.2, which says, for clinical chaplain, a Master of Divinity or master's or doctoral level degree in theology, counseling, or related disciplines from an accredited college. So MDiv is not required as I read this. Is that true, or?
Vicki, remind me, what 730, what qualification would you be going for?
Clinical chaplaincy.
Yeah. MDiv in and of itself is not required. I mean, there could be other degrees per the standards, to your point, that, a degree in the behavioral sciences could serve as the person's degree. Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. Terrific.
Did you really mean what you just said, Jonathan?
I did, yes.
Okay. How do we deal with the theologies? And what those theologies represents disciplines of thought, each one of them. And you if you don't go through the disciplines of thought, systematic theology being the most obvious, if you don't go through that, that really changes your ability to process other things that are part of our tradition. So I'm just asking, well, how do we accommodate the insights of the four theologies?
Well, I mean, Bill, the question was, what does the standard allow for? And the answer is that there are other degrees that would allow that. It sounds like there's some philosophical question about that that you have, and I know have had for some time.
Yeah. If the other degrees and additional coursework demonstrate having accomplished work in these areas, that's fine. But the other degrees in and of themselves mean nothing. In and of themselves mean nothing. It's what they contain and what is presented by the applicant. That's the confusing part.
Yeah.
I can see a person with a master's in business administration having done the coursework and have an outstanding presentation and be able to present in ways that are very effective, but it's based upon what they've actually studied.
Well, our standards have never allowed for a degree in business administration in and of itself to be a qualifying for any credential that we've had.
I'm stretching it a little, I know.
Yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe the future of our field needs more MBAs. I don't know.
All right, there's another question here. Is the reciprocity form the grandfathering form in quotation, or is there another? Those are one and the same form. And then Al has offered some insight via the chat that there will need to be sufficient theology in addition to a behavioral science degree. And he's made that clarification here as well. Any other questions coming for us tonight? All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. It sounds like this was a successful evening, and we will have
Jonathan?
other opportunities to do this. Yes, Krista.
Jonathan, sorry to interrupt you. David Roth had a question.
No,
Okay.
I was just I was going to follow up on the previous question from Vicki, but I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody. We'll let the community know when there's other opportunities to do this. Well, good evening.